Well, why don't we, it's a couple minutes past 10 o'clock. Why don't we get going? And we are getting more people logging in, so they'll be catching up as we go through the presentation. So good morning, everyone. This is Bill Gates from Westchester SCORE. Today's webinar is Essential Problem Solving for Business, Managing and Growing Your Business with New Problem Solving Techniques. Today we have Bill Strobinger, who is president of Results for Change and a SCORE mentor, who will be giving the presentation. Bill, do you want to move to the next slide, please? So just a couple slides before we get going. Obviously, I think for those who have been on some SCORE Westchester presentations, you've seen this before, but for those who have not, a little about SCORE Westchester. Our goal, we are a nonprofit. Our goal is to foster a vibrant small business community in and around the Westchester County area. We do that in three ways. We provide confidential business mentoring. And hopefully, if you're not a mentee, then please sign up. Please go to our website at westchester.score.org. We also provide, as we're doing today, webinars and workshops, although unfortunately, with the COVID world that we live in, we are not doing in-person workshops quite yet. It feels like we'll be getting around the corner. And we do hold our workshops at the White Plains Library once we are good to go. So for the time being, we'll continue to do webinars. And then lastly, we do have extensive online educational resources via our website. And our clients, they're anywhere from startups to established businesses and everything in between. We've got several business mentors with wide-ranging industry experiences and areas of expertise to draw on to help you solve your business problem. Please reach us with the number below as well as the website, and you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Next slide. So just real quick, you guys have probably seen this if you've been on plenty of Zooms. We will be doing a Q&A, and just go at the bottom of the screen and you'll see the Q&A box, and just put your questions there. And when we have our Q&A session, we will try to get to as many as we can. And we do have the hour, so we'll leave about 10 or so minutes for Q&A. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Bill.
Thank you very much, Bill. So let me take a minute to introduce myself. Bill Strobinger. Here's some info about my company, also some info about my background, and probably as far as my background is concerned, I've worked in all three of the sectors, and I'm also on the AMA faculty. And probably most important for this particular webinar is I'm the recent author of The Essential Problem Solver. So this is where my method, six-step method appears, and we'll be talking about it. And I'm hoping that many of you brought a situation that when we're going through the method, you might look at how it might apply to your particular situation. So again, I want to welcome everybody here, and let's take a look at the agenda. It's going to be in three major parts. First, we're going to look at a six-step problem-solving model application. So I'm going to show you how I used this model in the past to raise $500,000. Hopefully that's of interest. Then we're going to look at how you become an essential problem solver. Both you and the people that are going to be helping you look at your problem and coming up with solutions. There are three parts of that: being open-minded, exploring assumptions, and understanding point of view. And then lastly, we're going to go through the six-step method one step at a time. And then we'll end up with Q&A. Now, for you to get the most out of this webinar, hopefully you have something that you could jot down to take notes or jot down your ideas. I'll be asking you some questions that I'd like you to think about, and you might want to put the answers to those questions. Also, if you have any questions, jot those down, and as Bill said, put them in the Q&A box. So it's going to be a lively session. It's going to be fast-paced. So again, please put your questions in there, and we're going to take stop after the second part and answer some of the questions, and the rest of the questions we'll handle at the end. So here it is, the 6-step model. And you can see the arrows there. And I'll explain more about the model in the third part when we go through each step. But let's look at how I applied this model to a situation that I had when I was the director of the volunteer center in Westchester. So we did a strategic planning session, and what we came up with was a vision for how do we become, the question we asked was, how do we become the center of volunteerism in Westchester? And when we developed awareness, step 1, we looked at a couple of different areas to, again, become the center. And we thought that the two most important were going to be programs and services and finances. And we finally hit on, in defining the problem, the finance part, because we thought that was kind of a need for us to be in existence and to operate as smoothly as possible. So the question, and again, I'm going to suggest that you define the problem as an open-ended question when you're going through this. How can the volunteer center become more financially self-sufficient? And the reason for that is we had one major funding source, and we felt like we had to diversify our funding. So step 3, and this is a step that's really important in exploring a problem, and this also comes in 3 parts. The first thing we looked at was who were our customers. And we thought the 2 major customers were companies and nonprofits. And so we selected one of those customers, and we selected companies because that's where the money would probably come from. And when we looked at what we knew and what we needed to know about that customer, one of the things, the next step we did was to clarify and confirm what we thought was true. So an assumption is what you believe is true. And we thought that companies would fund our projects if we came up with a new project. And the evidence that we had was some companies already funded us. They already gave us money for some of our special events and some of our projects. So we thought that evidence was pretty compelling. And so we came to the conclusion that companies would fund our new activities. And you'll see when we go through these steps that this is the process you need to go through, these 3. What's your assumption? What's the evidence? What's the conclusion? And then the last one under explore the problem was consider. And what we wanted to do is consider other points of view. We knew we were looking at it from our point of view, from the staff point of view, but we wanted to look at it from the company point of view. And we also needed to get permission from our board to move forward. So those were the 2 other points of view that we needed to look at. Step 4 is generate and analyze and select options. So again, it's a little bit of a 2-part issue here. So when we were looking at options, we looked at not only what was going on in Westchester and what we were doing, but we looked all around the country because there were volunteer centers all around the country. And what we saw was that a number of them were creating these large fundraising events where they were raising money for nonprofits and also getting a cut of it themselves. So we thought this was going to be our best avenue to pursue. So we organized a large joint fundraising project. So in implementing the solution, we created the human race. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it who are in Westchester. It hasn't been around for a while now, but it ran strongly for a number of years. And we created the event and the review and assess progress. Well, in evaluating the event, we held it. We had over 30 corporate sponsors. We had 100 nonprofit agencies participating, and we raised over $500,000. And so for us, our piece of the money, we got enough money to hire 2 staff people. And one of the staff people was going to help us in the future with the human race, and the other one was going to provide services for those companies. So I hope you can see that this model really works. So the second part of this that I want to look at is the people part. So what does it take to become an essential problem solver? And this is important because you're the one who's going to be assessing things, looking at them, and then coming up with solutions. And I hope you're also going to not do it alone. So I would strongly suggest that you put a small team together, and it could be anywhere from 2 to 6 people. And we'll talk about that a little later. But you don't want to just do it on your own because you want to get other points of view. You want to get other ideas from people. So let's take a look at what it does take to become an essential problem solver. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. The first one is, are you open-minded? And because we don't have the chat, I'm just going to ask you to think about it and answer it on your own. And what I'm going to do is give you some responses that previous groups have said in the past. So most people say, yes, I'm open-minded, which is great. Then I'm going to ask, what do you do that shows you're being open-minded? So again, think about that for a minute. What do you do that shows you're being open-minded? And again, some of the answers that I've received in the past are asking questions, active listening, understanding others' perspectives. So those are good ones, and you might have come up with other ones yourself. And that's great. Because what I'm suggesting is that you be open-minded, not only during this webinar, but when you're looking at your problems. But are we always open-minded? And I think for most of us, we would agree, no, we're not always open-minded. So what's the other side of that? When we're closed-minded. So what do you do or not do when you're being closed-minded? Now we might want to take a look at just the ones in red right above. And these are things that you're not doing. You're not asking questions. You're not actively listening. You're not trying to understand other people's perspectives. Two other pieces that are really important is you're closed-minded when you've already made up your mind, when you think you know the answer. Because then you're not listening anymore to other people's point of view. So again, what you want to do is try and be open-minded. So let me ask you a question. I'm going to show you a poll on this one. Which one of these views can be most problematic? What you know, what you think you know, and what you don't know. So let's launch the poll. And so just answer the poll, pick the one that you think could be most, they're all problematic, but which one do you think could be most problematic? So again, just as soon as you can, put your answers in on the poll. And we'll keep it open for a little bit. Which of these views can be most problematic? Okay, let's take a look at the results. Okay, so you had 80% of what you think you know, and then the other 20% of what you don't know. So what I'm going to do, we can close that poll now. So what I'm going to do is put out there that I think what you know is the one that could be most problematic. Now you might say, why is that? Just think about what we talked about on the previous slide. And here's a quote that I think really will spell it out. It's hard to learn when you already know. Thank you, Amy Edmondson. So what happens is your mind closes up when you already know something. So try and catch yourself when you're being closed-minded and try and do those things to open up your thinking. All right, so let's get into how do we know what we know? So I want you to think about everything you know. So think about everything you know. And I'm going to break this down. We're going to do another poll, but I'm going to break this down into 3 different areas: direct experience, assumptions and conclusions, and reports from others. Now, direct experience is pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to give you a definition of assumptions and conclusions in a minute. And then reports from others is going to be not only reports, what somebody tells you, but other ways that you've gotten information. So here's the second poll that's out there. How do you know what you know? And again, which is the one that helps you know as much as possible for what you know, for everything you know? Which is the one that's the most, gives you the most information? So again, just answer that poll as soon as you can. We'll get all that information and we'll get it out to you. Just select one that gives you the most information about everything you know. Which one is it? Okay, we're going to get the results. Direct experience, 86%, and then reports from others, 14%. Okay, so let's close the poll and let's look at what the survey actually shows. Well, I'm sorry. First, I'm going to give you a definition, which I should have done before, of assumption and conclusion. So assumption is what you believe is true, and a conclusion is something you've reached as a result of doing some research or thinking about it. So I'll give you an example. You might assume that if you work hard, you're going to get ahead. So the conclusion would be, I'm going to work hard so I get ahead. So now let's look at what the survey results tell us. I hope that didn't affect anybody's answers here. So we look at direct experience, assumptions and conclusions, and reports from others. So here are the actual survey results. Now, let me say right up front is that this is your answers were not unusual. And I set this up in a way so that I do get the wrong answers. And you might say, so why do you do that? And let me tell you a couple of reasons why I do this. One is if you're not getting a good answer, maybe it's how you're asking the question. So an example of that would be, so if I asked you, think of everything you know, and then I put in, think of everything that's happening around the world, think of politics throughout the United States. If I just added some better language, we wouldn't have had so many people answering direct experience. So what I want you to get from this is that if you're not getting a good answer, think about the way you're asking the question, because maybe that's adding to the fact of why you're not getting a good answer. The other thing that we want to get from this is because reports from others section is so large, where is the information coming from? And this is a problem for a lot of us. Why is it a problem? Because most of us make the mistake of looking for information from the same sources. So we look at the same TV channels. We read the same newspapers. We even talk to the same people who might be like-minded. And so we're really kind of in an echo chamber, and we're only getting the information from one side. And the other thing is we tend to look for confirming evidence. So even if we are looking for outside information, we go to sources that are confirming what we already believe is true. We're asking people that already agree with us. So what can we do about that? So what we should do is also look for disconfirming evidence. So if we have any devil's advocates here, that's great because you probably already do that. Or if you have a devil's advocate in your group, that's great because they're probably going to bring that up. You want to look at what does the other side think or feel, and then what evidence are they using? So you really want to look at where is it coming from. So a good example I can give you is my wife is a nutrition buff. So when she looks at a website and she looks up a certain supplement, she'll find everything from it's the greatest thing in the world with studies to back it up, or it's the worst thing in the world also with studies to back it up. So the problem here is that where is it coming from? Who's funding it? So you want to look at when you're getting information, that's an important part, is to look at even what's the questions? How old is the survey? So you really need to look into it a little bit more than just taking it at face value. So how do we get our understanding of reality? And it's through our perceptions. So our perceptions is using our five senses, taking information, and then we get a concept of what reality is to us. It's again a three-step process. We focus on specific information through our senses. It goes through our individual filters, lenses, and frames. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then we make an interpretation of what we believe is true. We come up with an assumption. So let's look at this in pictorial form because it's probably a little easier. So again, we select sensory data. There are millions of things coming at us a second. Our mind selects some small amount of those to focus on. It goes through these filters. We make an assumption, draw a conclusion, or take an action or have a belief or expectation. So the very first thing is, let's take a look at what's involved in our filters. So what do you think makes up those filters that the information our senses are focusing on goes through? What's involved in the filters? And again, think about it for a minute. You might want to jot down what you think is involved in that. Again, from groups in the past, what they came up with is knowledge, what you know, your experiences, maybe even your values, the way you were brought up. All of those are built into our filters, and that's why the assumption that comes out of that is very different. So let's use a real life example. So let's say you entrepreneurs or people that have your small businesses, you were applying for a loan or maybe a PPE grant or whatever it was. And so what happened was you applied for the grant and you didn't get anything back. You didn't get any information at all. So what happens is you make an assumption. So the assumption might be, they're not interested in my company or my project. So the conclusion you would draw is, I guess I'm not going to get any money, so it's not worth me trying to get any money from these people. And so the action you take or not take, in this case, is you don't apply for money again. Now, the problem with this is what's the evidence for that assumption? What's it based on? You didn't hear anything. So that's really, the evidence is pretty weak. So what you want to do is try and find out what happened. Because maybe it wasn't that they weren't interested in your particular project or your particular company. Maybe it was just that it got lost in a shuffle or people didn't understand it. So what we want to do is make sure that we just don't make an assumption, draw a conclusion, and take an action or have an expectation or belief just from the get-go. Now I'm going to give you two situations where this really can be problematic, and I'm going to tell you a couple of two stories that kind of highlight it. So the first one is recently I heard about a shop owner who had one of his cashiers come in and say, I just saw another cashier, Michelle, take $20 out of the cash register and stick it in her pocketbook. So what might an assumption be? And again, from past groups, I've heard she stole it. So what would a conclusion be? She's a thief. So what would an action be that you might take? And I've heard fire her, right? So that's going right up the ladder, right? With no stopping to check out your assumptions or conclusions. So this person the person who owned the shop was a little smarter, and he said, do you mind telling her to her face? No, I don't want any thieves around here. Called her in, came over. I saw you take $20 out of the cash register and stick it in your pocketbook. Surprised, she looked at her and said, oh, I guess you didn't see me put the 4 5s in before I took the 20 out. So surprise, surprise. And as one of my recent groups said, oh, she's a liar and a thief. But no, that was not the situation. Why? Because they can go out and count the cash register. So what happened there? Anybody have a guess of what happened there? And this is something that happens to us. And again, it could happen to you when you're getting involved with looking at information from your particular problem. The thing was, it was partial attention, not seeing the whole thing, just seeing that end part. And again, ever happened to you that you didn't see the whole thing and you got blamed for something, or somebody else blamed you, or you blamed somebody else without seeing the whole picture? So again, think about that. This could be a real problem. The second one is something I'll tell you a story from my own personal experience. I worked on Wall Street as a trader. And so, again, dealt with big money. And so trust and honesty was very important. Not that it's not important in all businesses, but I was also at that time doing volunteer work at the Foundling Hospital, which is a place in New York City that services foster kids. My job up there was to play with the kids. Tough job, somebody had to do it. And in the trading room, we had colored paper, pens, Post-its that we really never used. I went over to my boss and I said, do you mind if I take those up so the kids could play with it, draw, do different things? He said, take whatever you want. So I started going in the supply room every Friday, taking stuff and bringing it up to them. About 2 weeks later, one of the other traders, Bob, all of a sudden stopped talking to me. He wouldn't tell me what his customers were doing, and he didn't really care about what my customers were doing. Now, this was a very important part about being a trader, because what you want to do is share information so that you can get the trades internally and get both sides of the commission. So I was very upset about that, and I kept saying, Bob, what's wrong? He wouldn't tell me. About a week or so later, I cornered him in the cafeteria. Bob, what's going on? He said, I see you stealing that stuff every Friday. I shocked. I said, what? He said, as he said, I see you sneaking into the supply room and sneaking out. And I was walking in and walking out. Now, here's the difference. It wasn't partial attention. He was seeing the whole thing. What was that? A guess? Anybody? Misinterpretation. He was seeing the whole thing, but he was misinterpreting what he was seeing. Again, ever happened to you? So these are two things, partial attention and misinterpretation, that you're really going to have a red flag out for as you're looking at your problem and as you're solving your problem. And that's why it's good to have other people helping you. And that's why I suggest you putting a team of people together, at least a couple of people, to help you in your problem solving. So When you put a collection of these perceptions together, it gives you what we call a point of view. And what is a point of view? A position from which something is observed or considered, and it's a way of looking or thinking about something. So an example of that would be, are you a detail-oriented person, or are you more kind of open-ended, big picture? Are you a risk-averse person, or you are a risk-taking person? Are you logical, analytical person, or are you more about gut instincts? And lastly, what you do for a living, or your position in being a father or mother might play into your point of view. So what you want to first look at is what's your point of view. And then later on, as we look at point of view as the third leg of our exploring problems, you want to think about what other points of view do you need. So let me give you an example of point of view. So I worked for the Department of Transportation in New York City, and what they were looking at is setting up bicycle lanes. So here I pulled out a few of those points of view that they needed to look at. And as you look over these, you can see that they're different, but are any of them wrong? No, they're just different. So what you want to do in solving your problem is when you come up with defining your problem, you want to look at what are some of the other points of view that you need to look at. Because that's really important. If you're just looking at it from your own point of view, you're going to be very limited. It's like that tunnel vision piece. So here's a quote from Anais Nin that I think is really telling. We don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. So our perception and our point of view comes from who we are. And where does that come from? It comes from our experiences, the knowledge that we've had. So point of view is, again, limited to what we know and what we've experienced. So what does all this mean for us in problem solving and to be essential problem solvers? Want to look at what's the information that you're using and how are you interpreting it? So again, when you go through that information piece, you want to look at the information you've gathered, and then you want to look at what's the other information that you need. And sometimes you're going to see that the information you need may not be available, or the information you need may not be credible. So again, information is an important part of what you want to do with your problem solving. The second thing is, what point of view are you looking at it from? And then what other points of view do you need to consider? Now, a lot of times you might want to consider your customer's point of view. You might want to consider your competition's point of view. So there are many different points of view that you might want to look at. And again, it's dependent on what your situation is. And then lastly, determine who should you have on your problem-solving team. And again, I suggest that you have maybe 2 to 6 people on your problem-solving team to go through these steps with you. Now, the good news is we're here at SCORE. And guess what? You can get somebody to be on your problem-solving team. How do you do that? Ask for a mentor. Ask for a mentor. That could jumpstart your team right there. So get somebody to be a mentor. That would be somebody who could help you on your team, maybe even put together your team. So I'm going to stop right here, Bill, and I'm going to ask you to, again, if there's any questions, let's take 1 or 2 questions here.
I think there's just a couple. We should probably get those and keep going. We are at 10:30, just so you know. Just based on your experience, what are the typical problems that you have seen that you've had to work through or work with people to work through?
Great question. Again, this is all dependent on your audience. So my audience has primarily been corporations, companies, both small and large. I've had everything from how do I keep my staff to how do I raise enough money to move on. I've had people asking about, again, communication problems, or I've had a big problem now with people. How do we create the team spirit since a lot of us are now online or in a hybrid situation? So it's really dependent upon the situation, because everything is situational, and the context of where it's coming from.
Got it. And, a lot of the folks that we obviously, as you know, deal with are solo entrepreneurs, or they have a reasonably small group of people that they work with or work for. You talked about your problem-solving group as your core group of people to help you.
Mhm.
If you're a solo entrepreneur, who should you reach out to then?
Right. Well,
If you
again,
don't have that group.
I mentioned SCORE, so definitely get yourself a mentor. That would be the
Yep.
first. But secondly, I would get somebody who knows you. I'd get somebody who might know your customers. If you can get a potential customer or a real customer, that would be terrific. You might want to get somebody who knows the product or service that you're dealing with, who's got some experience with that. Somebody who's been successful. If you can get somebody who's been successful with the kinds of people that you want to entice, that's also great. Now, the terrific thing about this is you could learn from people who haven't been successful, just as well as from people who have been successful. So, and I'd say the one thing is get people who are different than you are. We talked about different points of view. If you're a risk-averse person, get a person who may be more risk-taking. If you're a logical, analytical person, maybe get somebody who's more dealing from the gut. But again, try and get a wide variety of people.
Got it. Okay.
Great. So let's move on. We got a lot to cover in this third section. And so in this third section, I really want to look at, and I want you to apply some of the issues in your own situation. So think about it. So here's the 6 steps in the problem solving. Now we're going to go over each step one at a time, and we're going to look at part of it. We're not going to be able to go through it in depth, but we're going to look at part of it. So an important part of this process, a couple of things. One is you see right there in the middle, stop and think. Stop and think is an important part of this particular model. And you want to stop and think as you're moving from step to step. You also want to stop and think as you're going through the steps, and you'll see why that is. And also, there are things that you're going to be able to want to do when you're in the step. So you're going to see that there might be more information before you move to the next step. And so you want to take it slowly. It's not something you can do in an hour or even in a day sometimes. And the other good thing about this particular model, you'll see the little arrows that are involved in there. If you, by chance, come up with an option and you're not being successful, you might want to re-enter the model where you think would be a sufficient look at it. You might want to go back to develop awareness. You might want to just go back to selecting another option. Or you might want to go back to, gee, did I define the problem correctly? So the great thing about this model is you can re-enter it. It's iterative, as they say. You could re-enter it if you think you're not being successful. And again, just go from there. Okay, so let's take a look at the different steps. So developing awareness, really critical to get some information, as we did, not only from your current environment, but for things outside of your environment that might be affecting what it is that your problem is concerned with. So what you want to do here is you want to ask good questions. Now, for each one of these modules or steps, there are worksheets. So I have a worksheet for each module. What I did was I pulled out some of the questions. There are lots more questions on the worksheet, but take a look at these questions. And just for a moment, it won't take too much time. Think about if you have a situation, what's the answer to some of these? What do you know? And then what do you not know? Again, how do you and others think and feel? Important part is how you feel or how you think others feel. Because how you feel or how others feel is going to have to do with how much energy or what commitment you have to following through with this. And feelings are important. I know people say, yeah, leave your feelings at home. No, feelings have to do with what you do or what you won't do. So you really want to connect with your feelings and others' feelings. And this third question is really critical too, is what's going on that might affect this situation? Especially now with the pandemic, are there things that have changed? Are there things with you, with your family, with what's going on in your business that might affect this particular challenge, problem that you're looking at? So very important to do this step. And again, very important to have people outside of yourself help you with this, because they'll bring in other things that you won't see. So, and each one of these steps takes a little time to do. So again, don't rush it. Okay, the next one, define the problem. And again, finding the right problem is often challenging. So it takes a good amount of time to do this. Again, we want to ask good questions. And so I pulled out, we have a worksheet for this, but I pulled out 3 questions about this. Again, where and with whom is the problem occurring? What's your role? And how does the problem affect you? What are the risks and consequences of the problem? So what are the risks and consequences of the problem now? What are the risks and consequences of you not solving it? What are the risks and consequences of you solving the problem? So you really want to take an in-depth look before you come up with your definition of the problem. And I suggest, as I mentioned before, that you define the problem in the form of an open-ended question. Now, why do I say that? Because if you do that, it's going to force you to come up with some answers. And that's what we're looking for. So here's something that would help you in coming up with an open-ended question. You might want to start with how can I, how can we? And if you're coming up with how can we, I want you to define who's the we you're talking about. Who are the people that you're talking about that are going to be involved in the we? Because that's going to also help you when you're trying to generate options, when you're exploring the problem and trying to generate options. Okay, so let's move on. And before we do that, I want to use a quote from our pal Albert Einstein. If you had an hour to solve a problem, take the first 55 minutes understanding the problem and the last 5 minutes solving it. So what that means is exploring the problem is really important, and it's going to take you time. So step 3 is critical. Do not skip it, and do not shortchange it. So the 3 areas that are involved in exploring the problem are collecting and assessing information, clarifying and confirming assumptions and conclusions, and considering what other points of view do you need to look at. So we're going to take each one of these separately. So collect and assess information. And I'm going to use the example I gave you up front, the volunteer center. What facts and data are you using? And then what other information do we need? So the facts and data that we were using is that companies already funded us for some of our projects and also came to special events. So the other information that we need to know is, would they fund us in a bigger way? So again, for your situation, what are the facts and data that you're using? And then what other information do you need to know? Really critical. And then what you want to see is that information available? If it's available, would it be credible? And again, these are important things. Now, if the information isn't available, that'll just tell you something, and you'll put it into your thinking when you're coming up with this next part, which is clarifying and confirming. So again, the assumption is, what do you believe is true? So what we believed is true is that they would fund us, and the evidence that we had was that they did fund us for some of these other projects. And so the conclusion we came to was they would fund us for the bigger projects. So important for you. So based on what you came up with the other information, what do you believe is true? What do you believe is true about your situation? Think about that for a moment. What are the things that you believe is true? Do you believe it's true that you can raise $50,000, $100,000 in the next month? And then why do you believe it's true? What's the evidence you have for that? And again, if you don't have any evidence, what does that mean in coming to a conclusion? So evidence is not always going to be there, but you want to look at each one of these assumptions, and you want to take it one at a time. What do I believe is true? What's the evidence or lack of evidence that I have? And then from that, what's the conclusion I can come to? So again, this is a really critical part, but you want to take it each assumption at a time. Okay, so the next step is, in exploring the problem, considering what other points of view you need to look at. So again, what you want to look at is, what do others think and feel about the problem? And then what do others know or not know about the problem? So you're looking at this from your point of view. And hopefully you're going to have some other people that are on your team that are going to put in their points of view. And so you want to look at what are the points of view that you're looking at. Then you want to look at what's some of the other points of view that we don't have. So let's say you're trying to raise money. So we don't have somebody from a financial institution to give us that point of view. Or we don't have somebody who's been successful in getting a loan. Or we don't have somebody who hasn't gotten a loan. So, or we want to look at it from a customer's point of view if you're providing a service. and you want to look at what's their point of view. Do they need the things that you're looking to provide? And again, a lot of times you'll see that maybe you're trying to provide some things that people don't really need. If you have 5 items in your product or service, and maybe they only need 3 of them. So you want to really do some research here. And that's what this is all about, doing some research and going out and finding out these other points of view. So this is, again, a very critical part, exploring the problem. So now creating options. Let's look at this. What you want to do is brainstorm. And so some of you have had experience with brainstorming, some of you not. Brainstorming is simply getting a piece of paper, flip chart or whatever, and then having people come up with options. And what you want to do, the big thing about brainstorming is no criticism. You just jot down every option that people throw out, just exactly the way they say it. Your purpose here is to think outside the box. So any option is fine, because what you're going to do then is going to use questions to encourage your and others' thinking. So if you run into a roadblock and people stop, give them a moment to think about it. Sometimes it's even good to have them come up with options individually on their own, and then come back and do it in a group setting, because sometimes that's better. People, give them an hour or so to think about it over lunch or whatever, and say, I'd like everybody to come back with at least one option. And then the other thing you want to do is list all the options. At the end, when you have a complete list, you may see that you have a couple small options that you may be able to combine. You may see that you have a big option that you're able to break apart and into different pieces. Or as you're going through this, you may actually create a new option. That's not your job in doing this, but it may happen. So you want to make sure that you capture all those items. Now, the second part of this is analyzing and selecting options. And so this part is you use individual criteria to select the 1 or 2 high potential options. Now, when I say high potential, I mean, the first thing, it's got to be doable. If it's not doable, it's not an option. And then the second one is you want to think about what's going to give you the greatest return for your investment of resources, time, money, whatever other resources you're putting in. And that's how you're going to decide on what option to pick. So if you pick 2 options, there's always going to be one that you're going to do first. So again, think about your options, think about the criteria you're using, and then select 1 or 2 high potential. Next step, implement solutions. Here's where you're going to create a plan. And a simple plan, doesn't have to be an in-depth plan. What's got to be done, who's going to do it, and by when. So what's the very first thing that needs to be done? And then who's the right person to be doing it? It may not even be somebody who's on your team. It may be that you have to go out and recruit somebody to do that. And then lastly, when can it be done? So you may have something that you're going to do to meet with somebody in the next 2 weeks. That's fine. And these plans should be written in pencil. Why? Things change. Things change for you, things change for other people. So let's say your plan is to meet with a bank representative in the next 2 weeks. You find out the person's on vacation. Okay, you don't throw away the plan, you just erase the date, put a new date on, and then just adjust the rest of the plan from there. So these things happen, that's why you want to write it in pencil. And again, I don't want to see your name on everything that has to be done. I want you to get people to help you in implementing your plan. Very important to do that. And then lastly, review and assess progress. So with review and assess progress, the first step is you want to set a review date and decide how you're going to evaluate success. Now, for a lot of these projects, there's a natural, normal review date that's in there. You need to get permission to do something. You need to get funding to move to the next step. So if you have a natural occurrence that's in your plan, you can use that as the review date. If you do not have something like that, I would say what you want to do is set up a review date sooner than later, because you want to be able to catch something that maybe isn't working, that you need to tweak. So again, you want to organize a process to review progress. And maybe things are working great, terrific. Because the last thing you want to do is create a way to capture learnings. And this is really critical, even if it's working great. Because if you can capture what you're learning, that's going to help you with the next particular problem or challenge you have. And if it's not working, you might be able to see what's happening that's slowing it down. The one thing I will say is do not just throw away the plan. If you see that things aren't working, think about, what did I learn and where should I re-enter the 6 steps to help me out? It might be, again, that you've developed the awareness that you've gotten from going through this process, and then just go through the steps again, and you'll be able to go through them probably much quicker, but you would go through them. Maybe it's just that you think that you selected the wrong option. So just go back to step 4 and select a new option, and then create a plan from there. So these are the 6 steps. I hope you got the point from this. And here's my promise to you, that if you apply the 6-step model, that you'll come up with at least one new option that you can implement that will put you on the road to solving your problem. So that's my promise to you. But again, you have to go through the steps. And there's 3 principles for success. One is you want to define the right problem, and in the right way. So let me give you a quick example of that. I had one woman in my group that she worked, she supervised people in 30 companies throughout the United States. And she wanted to find a way, she had a test that managers had to pass every year. And they hated it. She couldn't get them on the phone. They wouldn't answer a call. So her question was, how do I get these people to pass this test? Well, in talking with some people on her team, she came up with a better way to define the problem. How can I make this test something that would be valuable to these managers? Same question, much better way to put it. And she got a lot of great ideas for doing something in a different way. So defining the problem is really critical. So again, the way you define it is important. And you want to generate the right solution. And again, you may pick a solution. What you don't want to do is pick the easiest solution. You don't want to take the easy way out, right? You also don't want to pick the thing that's hardest that you're not going to be able to do. So that's why working with a team is going to help you in selecting a problem, so you're not picking your favorite one or the easiest one. And these people help you in generating the right solution. And then last but not least, apply the right follow-up. And the important part of that is the word follow-up. You got to follow up. And are you going to run into roadblocks and different things that are going to stall you? Yes, but don't let that stop you. Just look at it. What's the roadblock? What's stopping me? What can I do to either tack left or tack right or go around this roadblock and move forward? And as I said, it might be re-entering the model itself. So for my last slide here, I want to offer you a special bonus. And what I mean by that is I'm offering you the book introduction in my Essential Problem Solving book. And so the introduction itself covers the 6 steps. It gives you kind of an overview, 13 pages that'll give you an overview of the 6 steps, explain it in a little more detail, so hopefully help you on your way to implementing those 6 steps yourself. So all I'd ask you to do is email me. So there's my email address, resultsforchange@verizon.net. And in the subject line, put book intro, and I will send you a PDF of the intro. And so again, I hope this has been helpful to you. If you have a situation, again, I hope you were able to maybe follow through. I know we went through this pretty quickly, but I would say to you that there's a replay. So what you might want to do is look at the replay, stop it, in the different steps to use it to answer some of those questions. And again, I hope that you're successful in solving your problem or meeting your challenge. So, Bill?
Great. Bill, we will now spend some time for Q&A. We've collected some questions. And again, just to reiterate what Bill S. said, as opposed to this being Bill G., we will provide a copy of the slides in a PDF format, as well as a recording of the webinar. It should be up on our website. Give it a day or two, and you guys will be able to take a look at it and go through it at your leisure. We just have a couple minutes for questions, so I'll just go through a couple of them. Bill, it sounds like problem solving, I guess, almost definitionally is situational. An issue comes up and you got to solve it. Do you think that is there a way to systematize this to do it on a more consistent basis? Or is it really just when something comes up, you apply this technique?
Again, a great question. The challenge for most people that I've found is that they wait too long. So something comes up, they let it fester, they hope it's going to go away, they think it'll solve itself. And again, especially if it's a problem that's a kind of, I won't say existential, but it's really something that's very important, you want to deal with it. You want to deal with it up front. Now, again, every problem may not require you to use every step in this method, but I would take a look at the different steps and see what you might apply to your particular problem. So the other thing is that people, generally speaking, fall down in the follow-up department. They have great ideas. They're really motivated. And one thing that I always suggest people is, what's motivating you to take on this particular problem? Because if you could stay with what your motivation is, maybe it's something that's been bugging you for a long time. Maybe it's something that's causing you problems with other people, whether it's your staff. If you don't have a staff, maybe it's your own family. So if these are things that are in the way for you, again, that's going to motivate you to work on them. So, but I would say don't wait. Just dive right in. And I can't say it as many times as I should. Get other people to help you, even if it's just to give you ideas, to give you different ways of looking at it. So yes, everything is situational. It's also everything is contextual. It's what's the context, and is there a time frame involved in this? And sometimes you're going to see that if you have to do something by a certain time frame, you're going to have to look at how to work from the end up. So if you have to have something decided in the next 3 months, you want to use that as part of your generating options and selecting options as the final date that you need to have something by. Now, if you see that when you're trying to solve the problem, you need more time, I always suggest that you ask for more time. There's no point in rushing something through and not doing it in the right way, not doing it in a complete way. The one other thing that I would say about problems that is something that is problematic for a lot of us is that we tend to rely on past experiences. So one thing I will say for sure is that there are no two situations that are exactly the same. I'll say that again. There are no two situations that are exactly the same. So if a situation is happening, even if it seems like the same situation, if it's happening at a different time, it's different. So what you want to look at is you want to use past experiences, and you want to say, what can I learn from this other experience that was similar or seemingly the same? What can I learn from that? What worked, what didn't work, what did I do right, what didn't I do right? And then you want to say, this situation, what's different about this situation? And what do I need to look at differently? Hope that's helpful.
Yes, no, great answer. Again, I think this was one of the questions earlier, but I'll just sort of repeat it in a different way because it came up, which is, it feels like what you should be doing is trying to reach out to a group of people to be your, I'll call them board of directors, if you will. So the question is, does that make sense? And what type of people do you want on your problem-solving team?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I like the analogy of a board of directors. Let me use another analogy. Napoleon Hill, in his Think and Grow Rich, came up with something called a mastermind group, and mastermind group is more of kind of what I'm thinking of. And the difference between a mastermind group and a board of directors, since I've worked for board of directors, is you work for them and you take orders from them, but a mastermind group is looking at your particular situation. Who are the people that I need to be on my mastermind group that would be helpful to me in getting the information I need? So I'm going to give you an example. I've been in 2 mastermind groups. One was a group of trainers like myself, and we put together that group. And we'd meet for dinner once every couple of weeks. And each person would get their 15 minutes in the sun to talk about what their particular problem was, what they thought would be the right thing to be working on, and they'd get information from some of those other people. And then each person would get a turn and we'd go around the room. And that worked great. It worked great. The other mastermind group, which might be more to this audience, is that you pull together people that you think would be helpful to you. And again, I was in a mastermind group like that where a friend of mine who was a sales trainer put together people that he thought would give him good advice. He picked somebody like me because I was a trainer, but he also picked a marketing person that he knew to be on the group. He picked somebody else who worked with the kinds of customers that he was looking to work with. And then I think he picked on someone else who was involved in the field of sales in general. And so what he did was he got us together for dinner once, I think it was once every 3 weeks, and he bought us dinner. Now, I'm not suggesting that you have to buy somebody dinner, but you might want to, and I'm not even suggesting you meet for dinner, but I am suggesting that you ask for their help. So, and what you want to do is get some advice. Now, if you're going to ask somebody for advice, what you want to get is somebody who's going to give you some good advice. I'm going to give you just a quick example. I know time's running short. When I did my book, my first draft, I sent it out to the person I thought was going to give me the best advice. My friend Richard, graduate from a prestigious college, English major. I sent it out to him. About an hour later, he sends me back an email. Great job. I said, Richard, that's not what I was looking for. My mother could have given me that advice. What I was looking for is to somebody who can really look at it, tear it apart, give me some good advice. So I will say this, is that the people that you want to get involved in your team, mastermind group, whatever you want to call it, make sure that they're going to give you some good advice. That they're going to, not just be yes people or not agree with you, but are going to give you some good advice. And if somebody gives you advice, good advice, if you're not going to take it, say, thank you for the advice. Here's why I'm not going to take it. Or here's what I did, and here's how it worked out, either well or not well. So that might be my advice on getting a group together.
Okay, great. We are close to the top of the hour. So one last question, real quick. We are obviously in the pandemic. Touch wood, we're closer to the end than the beginning. I keep saying that, but I'm believing it. So having said that, have you seen, with the people that you've spoken with, the types of problems, that have crept up during the pandemic or trying to recover from the pandemic that are different than what you've seen in the past?
Yeah, again, another great question. Certainly with the hybrid way that people are working, some from home, some not from home. And the other big thing that I've noticed in the few, and I've done some in-person trainings already as we're coming out of this, is that there are things going on in people's life that are important. And it may not even be them. It may be people in their family. It may be things that have happened to them, people in their family, friends. I just lost a close friend recently. That's going to affect them and the way they look at things and the way they're going to act and what's going on. So you want to take extra special care to find out how people are doing. So the first thing I ask people these days when I reconnect with them is, how you doing? And you got to really mean it. Because you want to have the relationships, it's all about relationships. And if you don't have a relationship with somebody, you don't really have much. So again, create good relationships with people, care about them and things that might be affecting them. And then again, put together a great team.
Well said. Well said. Well, Bill, thank you so much for taking the time. And again, we will have the slides and the recording up. Give us a day or so, and we'll be up on our website. So thank you again for attending, everyone, and look forward to seeing you on our next one. And with that, we're done for the day.
Thanks for coming, everybody.